It's no secret that sleep is vital to the overall function of the human body. Not getting enough rest can make a person more prone to infection, obesity, heart disease, and a myriad of other serious health problems. With this in mind, how much sleep would you say you get per night? You may be able to wake up and get going after 5 or 6 hours, but is that enough? The recommended amount for a healthy adult is between 7 to 9 hours per night. And it's not just about the number of hours you get, but the quality of your sleep as well. If you've ever been jet-lagged, you know all too well that departures from a sleep schedule can have some ill effects. This is because the human body follows a 24-hour circadian rhythm, or circadian cycle, that can be thought of as your internal clock. It regulates when you're awake or asleep, and helps your body coordinate when to carry out different internal functions.
Circadian rhythms have become part of medicine in that when one is thinking about when is your blood pressure high, when is your ability to sleep, it's all regulated by a circadian clock system that is throughout the entire body.
That's Dr. Fred Turek, a professor of biology at Northwestern University and the director of their Center for Sleep and Circadian Biology. Turek says your circadian rhythm is vital to a variety of bodily functions, and throwing off this internal clock has several negative effects.
People who are working during the nighttime, say from midnight to 8 a.m., and then trying to sleep during the day, have a much higher prevalence of a variety of mental and physical disorders. But what we've learned over the years is that any sort of disruption of our biological clock at the level of the whole organism, meaning all of our biological rhythms, or even at the level of a single tissue or organ such as the pancreas, it's not properly timed with all the rest of the circadian clocks in the body, then we can have a dysfunction of that particular organ or that particular tissue.
For astronauts in space who don't have sunrise and sunset keeping their internal clocks accurate, this can pose some serious health challenges.
NASA has been very interested and aware of the circadian issues, disrupting circadian rhythms, disrupting sleep, and they've responded over the years such that the astronauts, for example, are given 8 hours of time to sleep, and they're roughly awake about 16 hours, and they're on a very fixed light-dark cycle, even in space, even though they're going around the Earth every 90 minutes, and so their day-night cycle is a 90-minute cycle. But for example, the International Space Station, but even on the shuttle, the light-dark cycle is controlled, and it's maintained constantly. They're not shift workers in the general sense of the term, because NASA makes sure that they sleep at the same time and are awake at the same time, unless there's some sort of event that needs to disrupt their sleep-wake cycle.
NASA scientists report that on average across missions, astronauts in space get about 6 hours of slumber per night. You may think that this number isn't that bad, but the quality of sleep is typically lower than on Earth, according to Dr. Emmanuel Urquieta. Urquieta is the Chief Medical Officer at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, a key partner of NASA. He's also an assistant professor at the Center for Space Medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine. He says that the rapid eye movement phase, the deepest stage of sleep, is drastically reduced while in space.
It's during that phase that you get most of the sleep that, brings all of the benefits from sleeping. So even though you might have 6 hours of sleep, the phase of the sleep that gives you most of the benefits and gives you the mental refresh is reduced by 50%.
In addition to this deficit, Urquieta says that roughly 70% of astronauts on board space shuttles and at the International Space Station have needed sleeping pills to help fall or stay asleep. Along with medications, there are set protocols and routines in place to help signal the body that it's time to rest or wake up.
Usually they get waken up with some music that they play from Earth. The days try to be roughly 16 hours of work and, of activities, I would say work, but 16 hours of scheduled activities and 8 hours of sleep. But, the space station is not the ideal place to sleep. Usually, at least on the USOS, on the US segment, Each astronaut has his or her own living quarter. It's a small place. They have actually doors. They can have some privacy there. Some of them have some windows to look outside, tiny windows like portholes. And they have some of their personal items there, some family pictures. They have a computer, so they can get some privacy there. But that being said, it's still not an ideal place to sleep.
Spacecraft can be a noisy setting, with all of the fans and systems running 24/7. In addition to blocking out the white noise, astronauts have to get used to the peculiar feeling of sleeping without gravity. Instead of lying back on a firm mattress topped with lush pillows, they get their rest while floating around in a sleeping bag tethered to a wall.
The sleeping bag is really on the wall or the floor or the ceiling. It depends on what part of the station they are. Of course, they don't feel that they are on the sleeping on the ceiling or sleeping on the wall because there's no gravity, right? So there's no sensory motor or proprioception cues. But, it's not what you're used to, right? You're used to sleeping on your side, your front, or your back, but not sleeping technically standing up, right? So that's another thing that they're not, the proprioception cues that you normally get here on Earth when you're sleeping, they're not there in space.
Despite the hardships that arise from this lack of sleep, Orquita says that in the short term, the comprehensive training and screening that astronauts undergo on Earth help prepare them to still perform even if they feel sleep-deprived. NASA is also developing new technologies to help aid sleep, including the development of a headpiece that astronauts could one day wear as they prepare for bed.
Imagine these sort of helmets that you would be wearing or headbands, and they're resonating at a very specific frequency. So this frequency goes into your brain, and then it helps you to, number one, to go to sleep, and number two, to stay sleeping, right? And this is completely non-pharmacological. So, all the medications that I was mentioning earlier, and not only these ones, but any medication that exists in the world, it has potential adverse events, right, and secondary effects.
Turek says that there's still much research that needs to be done to understand the long-term ramifications of living and sleeping in space.
We only have really good data for one person, really, Scott Kelly, I think, who has been in space for a year. And, to get to Mars and back is going to be about a 3-year mission. And NASA continues to study what is the effect of longer and longer time spent in space on the human biology, including the sleep-wake cycle. And we want to keep collecting data. And, since the mission to Mars is probably going to be in the 2030s, NASA, and I'll call it NASA, will be continuing to monitor the microbiota, the circadian rhythms, the sleep-wake cycle of individuals who are in space for long periods of time.
We do know that sleep is vital to each and every human, whether you're hitting the pillow while on Earth or in space. You can learn more about this topic and our guests by visiting viewpointsradio.org. This segment originally aired in August 2021 and was written by executive producer Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. This segment was brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Updated COVID vaccines have arrived just in time for the season that brings us all together. Find updated COVID vaccines at vaccines.gov. We can do this. Coming up on Viewpoints.
I woke up with all of this extra stress that I could actually feel in my body. And so for me, it was doing that intense, short workout.
The quick changes you can make to better handle stress this year. Then,
what they were able to do, unfortunately, was use weapons to have a physical attack on the power grid, which unfortunately did cause an outage in North Carolina.
Understanding the rising number of attacks on our nation's power grids. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.